For people listening, we are recording this on August 29th, just so you kind of get a little bit of a time frame of when Luke is talking about, he just finished up barley and was working on putting in some more cover crops. So, Luke, I know it's obviously year and weather dependent, but you talked about when that cover crop gets up to more about 8 inches is when you can kind of turn cows out. On a typical year, kind of what's your target date for being able to start to graze that?
It'll kind of be, it's usually about 30 days, 30 to 40 days after I plant. And I can get them out there sooner. I just don't want to take off too much of that cover crop right away because you just kind of lose a little bit of growth and then some root growth because it's kind of a main goal with the soil health. I want, above biomass is great for the cows, obviously, but I want that root growth going down into the soil, kind of help build aggregates and promote soil health that way. So that's why I kind of wait a little bit, but I guess other timing wise, it's like you said, it depends. Depends on how much moisture we have. We should, going into this year particularly, we've been wet pretty all summer, so we got lots of moisture. We've got good heat. So that cover crop that I'll be getting seeded here today, I'm going to start today seeding. I would assume that will be up and growing, pretty well in the next week. We've got rain forecasted, so it'll be kind of good timing and things like that.
And how long have you been implementing the cover crop? Well, I'm more focused on the grazing, but I know you're doing it for soil health in general. But how long have you been implementing that?
I guess we've been doing it since, kind of more often since 2019 when Ellie and I got involved. Randy, he had been doing a little bit, but once Ellie and I got involved in the operation in 19, we kind of really pushed adding more cover crops, doing more experimenting that with them, and trying to get cattle out to graze. Randy he'd graze a lot of just regrowth and then some radishes and things like that in the past, but having all the radishes and turnips and then growing up in Cooperstown, my family, they had been doing, that's kind of what got me into soil health and got me interested in it. Was my family back home. I remember it was when I was back in high school, like 14 years ago, we were planting radishes and turnips and peas after wheat harvest. And I remember we got a good rain one year. And I remember driving across the field and the turnips were like soccer balls out there. They were huge. And we were just bouncing across the field. I just thought that was awesome. And then we were able to get the cows out and we didn't bring them home until I think Christmas or whenever. It was whenever it snowed enough and the cows kind of quit. They were looking to come home. And so we moved them home then. And doing that, I just thought that was so cool to have them out on the fields. Didn't have to feed them hay. And that really got me interested, kind of looking at, how can we extend the grazing season further into the winter, and got me interested in soil health, which then led me after college. I was a crop and weed science major, and then I worked for the NDSU soil health department after college at NDSU and worked there for 2 years and just did more research into grazing and cover crops there. And then I took what I learned from NDSU and then implemented that here on our farm.
All right. So specifically with the cover crops, I know you just went through and you have a background from it with the operation you grew up on, education, etc., and your in-laws were already doing a little bit of it. But when you think back to when you and Ellie got onto the operation and were getting more involved and really pushing this more, is there anything you would have done differently from the start now that you're a few years in?
A couple things we've learned is, for one, like turnips, purple top turnips. We planted those. This was actually, I learned this from back on my family's operation. We had those big turnips Well, they kind of went to seed, or some of the seed didn't germinate that fall, and they germinated the next spring. And then we rotated. Typically, we've gone from like wheat or barley to a soybean the next year, or a navy bean, edible bean. And I remember those turnips would not die. They like kept germinating throughout the year, and by harvest time we had big turnips out there, and you're cutting low to the ground. And you want to talk about a mess, combining beans. We were picking up turnips, and they were staying in the navy beans, and it was just a slow process. And so it's one thing, like trying to mix, management wise, you got to think ahead of like, okay, what's my next crop going to be? Um, am I going to have any issues with this cover crop the next year? If there's any that's gone to seed or anything like that. Um, and so that's like fields that I know I'm going to go to beans or something. I don't put a purple top turnip in there, and I've just stayed away from that for ever since. And maybe it would be fine, I'm sure other people have good success, but I had that one bad experience, and so that's just one thing that I've learned. Uh, Different rates, like seeding rates, that kind of changes. I've kind of stuck with like a low rate for my radishes. I with my cereals, I plant kind of typically 40 or 50 pounds in an acre. Um, with my cereal rye, I get good grazing out of that, some good biomass, and then in the springtime, that's a good amount of seed out there to take up some excess moisture. I have gone higher rates, to really push, get a lot more biomass out there, um, which is fine, but it kind of, I don't know, kind of messes things up a little bit in springtime. I've had good and bad things happen, where it's taken too much moisture in the spring away from my cash crop. So that's kind of where I just kind of sit in the middle of the road for our soils. That's kind of, I tell people with more sandier soils, I would go with a lower rate just so you're not taking up excess moisture in the spring. With my heavier soils over here, I do put a little bit higher rates on, um, just because I can handle it and our soils can handle that. But I think there's kind of a threshold there for me too, so I kind of keep it in the middle. Cost wise too, a lower rate is cheaper. We're always trying to lower input costs and try to keep it as cheap, but kind of get enough bang for the buck out of it.
Absolutely.
Hmm.